Have you ever experienced something so terrifying, it still haunts you to this day? We've gathered some of the most bone-chilling true horror stories that will make you sleep with the lights on. But we want to hear from you too. Share your own scary encounters in the comments below. Did you see a ghost? Experience something paranormal? Or maybe you had a brush with a real-life monster? Your story could be featured in our next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join our community of horror enthusiasts. Now, prepare yourself for these 7 terrifying tales. The Whispering Walls. I never believed in ghosts. As a paranormal investigator, I'd visited countless haunted locations, debunking myths and finding logical explanations for every bump in the night. But the Villisca Axe murder house, that place changed everything. It was a crisp autumn evening when I arrived in the small Iowa town. The house stood silent, a weathered testament to the horrific events that unfolded there over a century ago. 8 people, including 6 children, brutally murdered in their sleep. The killer was never caught. As I approached the front porch, a chill ran down my spine. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight, as if the house itself was groaning in protest. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the knob. For a moment, I considered turning back, but I shook off the feeling and stepped inside. The interior was like stepping back in time. Vintage furniture, old photographs, and children's toys scattered about, all meticulously arranged to reflect that fateful night in 1912. The air felt thick and heavy, pressing down on me as I moved through the rooms. I set up my equipment in the children's bedroom upstairs, where the young victims had met their tragic end. As night fell, an eerie stillness settled over the house. I sat in the darkness, surrounded by my cameras and audio recorders, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed without incident. I was beginning to think this was just another uneventful investigation when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the sound of my own breathing. "Help us!" I froze, straining my ears. Had I imagined it? Then it came again, louder this time. "Help us, please." My heart raced as I fumbled for my audio recorder. The whispers multiplied, growing more frantic and desperate. They seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, filling the room with a cacophony of ghostly pleas. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me as an icy chill enveloped my body. Something brushed against the back of my neck. Light as a feather, but unmistakably there. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers turned to screams, high-pitched and terrified. I could make out individual voices now, children crying for their parents, a woman begging for mercy. The sound was deafening, drowning out my own panicked gasps. I bolted for the door, only to find it locked. I pulled and pushed, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, a child's laughter echoed through the room, cutting through the screams like a knife. Slowly, I turned around. A shadowy figure stood in the corner, axe in hand. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, with long, spindly limbs and a face hidden in darkness. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, it took a step towards me. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up outside on the front lawn, dew-soaked and shivering in the early morning light. My equipment was scattered around me, though I have no memory of bringing it out. The house stood silent once more, its secrets locked away behind those weathered walls. I packed up my gear with shaking hands and drove away as fast as I could, vowing never to return. But the Villisca Axe murder house wasn't done with me. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those whispers. They creep into my dreams, begging for help, pleading for salvation. And in the shadows of my room, I catch glimpses of a tall, dark figure, axe in hand, watching and waiting. I used to be a skeptic. I used to have logical explanations for everything. But now I know the truth. Some places are truly haunted, and some horrors never die. The Villisca Axe murder house taught me that lesson, and it's one I'll never forget. So if you ever find yourself driving through that small Iowa town and you see an old white house with a tragic history, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't go inside, because once those walls start whispering, they'll never let you go. The Basement Dweller. My wife, Sarah, and I were over the moon when we found our dream home, a charming craftsman in a quiet Boise neighborhood. The price was surprisingly affordable, which should have been our first red flag. But we were too caught up in the excitement of becoming first-time homeowners to question our good fortune. The real estate agent, a nervous man with darting eyes, mentioned the house had a colorful history. He laughed it off, saying every old house had its stories. We didn't press for details, too eager to sign the papers and start our new life. The first few weeks were blissful. We painted walls, arranged furniture, and started to make the place our own. But as the novelty wore off, we began to notice. It started with odd noises from the basement, faint at first, easy to dismiss. A scratching sound, like nails on wood, soft thumps, as if something heavy was being dragged across the floor. Sometimes I could swear I heard a muffled voice, too distorted to make out words. We tried to rationalize it. Old pipes, settling foundations, maybe mice in the walls. But the sounds grew louder, more frequent. They seemed to follow a pattern, starting around sunset and continuing until dawn. Then came the smell. It started as a faint, musty odor, unpleasant, but not alarming in an old house. But it grew stronger day by day, evolving into a putrid stench of decay that permeated every room. We deep cleaned, checked for dead animals in the walls, even called a plumber to inspect the pipes. Nothing helped. Our neighbors started to avoid us. I'd catch them watching from behind curtains, whispering to each other when we walked by. One day, an old woman stopped me as I was getting the mail. "You need to leave that house," she said, her roomy eyes wide with fear. "Before it's too late." I laughed it off, but her words haunted me. That night, as Sarah slept, I decided to investigate the basement. I'd avoided it until then, telling myself it was just because we hadn't gotten around to renovating it yet. But deep down, I knew I was afraid of what I might find. The basement door creaked as I opened it, the sound echoing in the silent house. The stairs disappeared into inky blackness. My flashlight beam seemed feeble against the oppressive dark. Each step down increased the feeling of dread in my gut. The smell was overwhelming here, so thick I could almost taste it. My foot hit the concrete floor, and I swept the flashlight around the room. At first glance, it seemed normal. Old boxes, dusty furniture, cobweb-covered shelves. But then I noticed something odd about the far wall. It seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. As I approached, my flashlight beam caught something moving in the corner. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was hunched and misshapen, its skin a sickly gray color that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. The creature turned to face me, and I saw its eyes, milky white orbs that glowed in the darkness. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. I don't remember running up the stairs or slamming the basement door behind me. I came to my senses in the kitchen, gasping for air, my shirt soaked with cold sweat. Sarah found me there in the morning, curled up on the floor. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words sounded crazy even to my own ears. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. We moved out that day, leaving most of our belongings behind. We told our families it was because of black mold, but we both knew the truth. Even now, years later and hundreds of miles away, I can't shake the feeling that something followed us from that house. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I catch a whiff of that same decay. And in the shadows of our new home, I swear I see a pair of milky white eyes watching me, waiting. The basement dweller found us once. I fear it's only a matter of time before it finds us again. The Crooked Street Curse. When I landed a job in San Francisco's tech industry, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. But finding affordable housing in the city, that was the real challenge. So when I stumbled upon a reasonably priced apartment on the famous Lombard Street, I couldn't believe my luck. The views were stunning, the neighborhood charming, and the rent, well, it was actually within my budget. I should have known it was too good to be true. The first few weeks were a dream. I'd wake up to the sight of the bay, walk down the winding street to grab coffee, and spend my evenings exploring the vibrant city. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. It started with laughter. Faint, distant, like it was coming from another apartment, but it would echo through my empty rooms at odd hours of the night. I blamed it on thin walls and eccentric neighbors. Then came the cold drafts. Even on still, warm days, icy fingers of air would brush past me, raising goosebumps on my skin. I checked for open windows, called maintenance about the AC, but found no explanation. Objects started to move on their own. I'd place my keys on the counter, only to find them in the bathroom sink hours later. My coffee mug would slide across the table when I wasn't looking. Small things, easy to dismiss as forgetfulness or imagination, but it was hard to explain away waking up to find all the faucets running full blast, flooding my bathroom floor. That's when my neighbors started talking. Mrs. Chen from next door caught me in the hallway one morning, her eyes wide with concern. "You're in the cursed apartment," she whispered, glancing nervously at my door. "No one ever stays there long." She told me about the apartment's dark history, a string of mysterious deaths and disappearances stretching back decades. Former tenants who went mad, who vanished without a trace, who were found dead under inexplicable circumstances. "It's cursed," Mrs. Chen insisted. "They say a fortune teller lived there once, long ago. She was evicted, left to die on the streets. With her last breath, she cursed the apartment and all who would live there." I laughed it off, of course. Curses weren't real. Ghost stories and urban legends, nothing more. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I woke to find deep scratches on my bedroom wall, spelling out a single word: leave. I told myself it was a prank, a cruel joke by one of the neighbors. But deep down, I knew. Something was wrong with this place, something that defied rational explanation. The incidents escalated, shadows moving at the corner of my vision, whispers in empty rooms, the smell of decay that would come and go without warning, and always, that feeling of being watched. I started spending less time at home, staying late at the office, crashing on friends' couches, but I always had to return eventually. And she was always waiting. I saw her for the first time on a foggy night in November. I'd been tossing and turning, unable to sleep, when I felt a presence in my room. I opened my eyes and there she was, an old woman in outdated clothes, standing at the foot of my bed. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken and filled with a hatred that chilled me to my core. She reached out, her fingers elongating into twisted claws. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed, helpless as she loomed over me. I must have blacked out. I woke the next morning, my heart racing, convinced it had been a nightmare, until I saw the deep, ragged scratches on my arms. I moved out that day, leaving most of my belongings behind. I couldn't get out of that apartment fast enough, but the curse, it followed me. I still feel her presence, lingering just out of sight. Sometimes in crowded places I catch a glimpse of her face in the crowd. She's always smiling, always watching, waiting for her moment. I don't know if I'll ever be free of her. The curse of Lombard Street has sunk its claws into me, and I fear it will never let go. So if you're ever in San Francisco and you see an apartment for rent on that famous crooked street, keep walking. Some deals are too good to be true, and some curses are too powerful to escape. The mirror's secret. I never thought much about the power of heirlooms until I inherited my grandmother's antique mirror. It was a stunning piece, ornate gold frame, slightly tarnished silver backing, clearly valuable both in monetary terms and sentimental worth. When the estate lawyer handed it to me, I felt a strange tingle run through my body. At the time, I chalked it up to emotion. Now, I know better. I hung the mirror in my bedroom the day after the funeral. It fit perfectly on the wall opposite my bed, reflecting the soft light from my bedside lamp. That first night, as I got ready for bed, I caught myself admiring how it tied the room together. But as I turned away, something in the reflection caught my eye. For just a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone else staring back at me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Shaking my head, I blamed it on grief and lack of sleep. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences plagued my house. At first, it was small things, a book falling off a shelf, keys misplaced, the feeling of being watched, but it escalated quickly. Doors would slam shut with no breeze to blame. Objects would fly across rooms as if thrown by invisible hands. And always, there was that face in the mirror. I'd catch glimpses of him when I least expected it. An old man with hollow eyes and a twisted grin that sent shivers down my spine. He'd appear for just a moment, then vanish when I blinked, leaving me to question my own sanity. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, grief, an overactive imagination, anything to explain away the inexplicable. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door locked from the outside. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. That's when I heard it. A soft chuckle coming from the direction of the mirror. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I turned to face it. The old man was there, more clearly than ever before. But this time, he wasn't just a reflection. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, he began to step out of the mirror. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. He moved towards my bed, arms outstretched, that terrible grin growing wider with each step. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as I scrambled backwards. My back hit the headboard, and I could go no further. The old man loomed over me, his cold, dead eyes boring into mine. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, reached for my throat. That's when everything went black. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The doctor said I'd been found unconscious on my bedroom floor, surrounded by shards of broken glass. They assumed I'd fallen and hit my head on the mirror. If only it were that simple. As I recovered, I learned more about the mirror's history. It had belonged to my great-great-grandfather, a man rumored to have dabbled in the occult. Family legend said he'd trapped a demon in the mirror, but died before he could destroy it. I thought it was just a story. Now I'm not so sure. The mirror is gone, shattered beyond repair. But its influence lingers, sometimes in reflective surfaces, windows, puddles, even my phone screen. I catch glimpses of that face. The old man is still watching, still waiting. I've tried to move on, to forget what happened, but every night, as I drift off to sleep, I hear that chuckle, and I know, with chilling certainty, that one day he'll find a way back. So I warn you, be careful of old mirrors, especially those with history. You never know what might be looking back at you. And once it sees you, it never forgets. The mirror may be gone, but its secret lives on, and it's hungry for more. The forgotten floor. I've always been a night owl, so when I landed a job as a night security guard at the historic Majestic Hotel downtown, it seemed perfect. The pay was decent, the work easy, and I had the whole place to myself. Or so I thought. The Majestic was a relic from the Roaring '20s, all Art Deco glamour and faded elegance. 15 floors of history, with whispers of Prohibition-era speakeasies and celebrity scandals. But like many old buildings, it had its quirks and its secrets. My first few weeks were uneventful. I'd make my rounds, check the cameras, and spend the quiet hours reading or watching movies on my phone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was the little things at first. Elevator doors opening and closing on their own. The faint sound of music drifting through empty hallways. Cold spots that would appear and disappear without warning. I told myself it was just an old building settling or my imagination running wild in the small hours of the morning. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Then came the night that changed everything. It was around 2 a.m., and I was doing my usual rounds. I stepped into the elevator, my finger hovering over the button for the 12th floor. That's when I noticed something odd. There was no 13th floor button. The numbers jumped from 12 to 14. Huh? I muttered to myself. Must be a superstition thing. I pressed 12 and leaned against the wall as the elevator began to rise. But something felt wrong. The ascent seemed to take longer than usual, and there was a strange vibration I'd never felt before. When the doors finally opened, I knew immediately I wasn't on the 12th floor. The hallway before me was dark, the wallpaper peeling and rotted. The carpet was threadbare, and the air was thick with the musty smell of decay. I checked the floor indicator. It read 13. My heart began to race. This was impossible. There was no 13th floor. I jabbed at the lobby button, but nothing happened. The doors remained open, almost inviting me to step out. Against my better judgment, I did. The moment my foot touched the carpet, I heard it. Faint at first, but growing clearer with each second. Music. Not the piped-in music from the lobby, but real, live jazz. And underneath it, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. It was coming from the end of the hall. I moved forward, drawn by a curiosity I couldn't explain. As I neared the end of the corridor, the sounds grew louder. I could make out voices now, speaking in the clipped accents of old movies. That's when I saw him. At the very end of the hall stood a figure in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform. He was facing away from me, perfectly still. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaking. "This area's off limits. You need to leave." Slowly, the figure turned. I'll never forget what I saw. His face was twisted in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't a face at all. It was more like a mask, frozen in that horrifying expression. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The bellhop began to move towards me, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, back towards the elevator. But the doors were closing. I lunged forward, my fingers just grazing the metal as they slammed shut. I pounded on the doors, screaming for help. Behind me, I could hear the bellhop's uneven footsteps getting closer. Just as I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, the elevator plummeted. I woke up in the lobby, sprawled on the floor in front of the elevator. The morning shift manager found me there, babbling about the 13th floor and the screaming bellhop. They didn't believe me, of course. There was no 13th floor, they said. Never had been. They wrote it off as me falling asleep on the job and having a nightmare. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I quit that day, but the Majestic Hotel wasn't done with me. Every night at 3 a.m., no matter where I am, I hear the faint ding of an elevator. And sometimes when I pass tall buildings, I hear knocking coming from inside the elevator shaft. A frantic, desperate knocking, begging to be let out. So if you ever find yourself in an old hotel and the elevator stops on a floor that shouldn't exist, don't get out. Don't explore. Because some floors are forgotten for a reason, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The Harvester's Cabin. My friends and I always had a thing for urban exploration. Abandoned buildings, forgotten places, we loved the thrill of uncovering hidden histories. But nothing could have prepared us for what we found in those woods. It started with a local legend, whispers about a cabin deep in the forest, once owned by a serial killer known as the Harvester. They said he'd lure victims to his remote hideaway, where well, the stories varied, but none of them ended well. Of course, we had to check it out. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Liz, and Chris. We'd been friends since high school, bonded by our love of the macabre. When Jake found coordinates to the supposed cabin online, we couldn't resist. The hike took hours. The forest grew denser, darker, as we pushed deeper into the wilderness. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the trees themselves were trying to keep us out. Just as we were about to give up, we saw it. A small, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by overgrown vegetation. It was exactly as the legends described, isolated, decrepit, with an aura of menace that made my skin crawl. "Maybe we should head back," Liz said, her voice barely above a whisper. But curiosity won out over caution. The cabin's interior was a time capsule of horror. Rusty tools hung on the walls, their purposes best left unimagined. Strange symbols were carved into every surface, intricate patterns that made my eyes hurt to look at them. As we explored, the sun began to set. That's when Jake had his brilliant idea. "Let's camp here tonight," he grinned, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Get the full experience, you know?" I should have said no. We all should have. But the thrill of spending the night in a killer's lair was too tempting to resist. We set up our sleeping bags in the main room, joking nervously about ghosts and restless spirits. As darkness fell, an uneasy silence settled over us. It was around midnight when we heard it, the sound of heavy footsteps circling the cabin. At first, we tried to convince ourselves it was just an animal, but the footsteps were too deliberate, too human. "Guys," Chris whispered, his face pale in the beam of his flashlight. "I saw something move past the window." We huddled together, hearts racing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, a shadow passed by the window, the unmistakable silhouette of a man wielding an axe. Panic set in. We scrambled to barricade the door, piling furniture against it. The footsteps circled faster, more frantic. Something heavy thudded against the walls. Suddenly, with a deafening crack, an axe burst through the wooden wall. We screamed as splinters flew. Through the jagged hole, a face appeared, or what should have been a face. Instead, we saw a gruesome mask, crafted from what looked horribly like human skin. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Liz's hand. We bolted for the back window, smashing through it into the cold night air. We ran blindly through the dark forest, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us, we could hear the heavy footfalls of our pursuer, and something else, a low, guttural laugh that chilled me to my core. I don't know how long we ran. Hours, maybe. We got separated at some point. When dawn finally broke, I found myself alone at the edge of a road, miles from where we'd started. The police arrived later that morning. They found no trace of our attacker, no evidence of the horrors we'd witnessed. The cabin itself was gone, nothing left but a clearing in the woods. Jake and Chris turned up a day later, shaken but alive. But Liz? We never saw Liz again. The official report called it a tragic accident. They said Liz must have gotten lost in the woods, fallen into a ravine maybe, but we know the truth. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear that laugh. And deep in the woods, where no one dares to go, I swear I can hear the echo of an axe, still searching for its next victim. So if you're ever hiking in those parts, and you come across an old cabin that shouldn't be there, run. Run as fast as you can, because the harvester is still out there, and his harvest is far from over. The house that hungers. When my sister Emily bought a dilapidated Victorian house on the outskirts of town, I thought she was crazy. The place had been on the market for years, its price dropping steadily as buyer after buyer backed out at the last minute. But Emily saw potential where others saw ruin, and I couldn't help but admire her optimism. "It just needs some love," she told me, her eyes shining with excitement. "Will you help me fix it up?" How could I say no? So, armed with tools and a misplaced sense of confidence, we set to work. The house had a bad reputation. Previous owners had all moved out within months, citing strange occurrences and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Local kids dared each other to spend the night on the porch, but none ever made it past midnight. We laughed off the stories, chalking them up to small-town superstition. But as we worked, we uncovered disturbing details that were harder to dismiss. Hidden behind a false wall in the study, we found a room filled with antique medical equipment, rusted scalpels, bone saws, and devices I couldn't even name. In the attic, we discovered journals detailing grotesque experiments, the handwriting becoming more frenzied and illegible with each entry. Most unsettling were the scratches we found on the inside of closet doors, as if someone, or something, had been desperately trying to claw its way out. And always, there was that feeling, a pervasive sense of hunger that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was subtle at first, a nagging emptiness in the pit of my stomach that no amount of food could satisfy. But it grew stronger with each passing day, an all-consuming hunger that gnawed at my insides. Emily felt it too, though she tried to hide it. I'd catch her staring blankly at the walls, her hand absently rubbing her stomach. She grew paler, thinner, her once bright eyes now sunken and dull. "Maybe we should take a break," I suggested one evening, watching her push food around her plate. "Get out of the house for a few days." But she refused. "We're so close to finishing," she insisted. "Just a little longer." That night, I woke to find myself sleepwalking in the basement. I came to my senses in front of an old coal chute, my hands bloody from trying to pry it open. The walls around me pulsed gently, like a giant heart beating in slow motion. And then I heard it, a faint, wet sound coming from inside the walls, like chewing. Horrified, I stumbled backwards. In the corner, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight from a high window, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. A mouth had formed in the wall, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. As I watched, frozen in terror, it opened wider, revealing a pulsating throat that seemed to go on forever. I ran upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emily," I shouted, bursting into her room. "We have to leave now." But her bed was empty. From the walls around me, I heard her muffled screams. The house had taken her, absorbing her into itself to satisfy its endless hunger. I fled that night and never returned. I told the police Emily had run off, unable to face the truth of what had happened. They searched the house but found nothing. To them, it was just an old, empty building. But I know the truth. The house still stands, awaiting its next meal. Sometimes, when I drive by, always on the opposite side of the street, I swear I can see Emily's face pressed against the window, silently begging for help. I dream about her sometimes. In my nightmares, I'm back in that basement, watching helplessly as the house devours her. I wake up drenched in sweat, the phantom taste of plaster and blood in my mouth. I've tried to warn others about the house, but who would believe such a fantastical story? So it sits there, patient and hungry, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to be drawn in by its faded charm and low price tag. If you ever find yourself house hunting and come across a too-good-to-be-true Victorian with a troubled past, remember my story. Some houses are more than just buildings. Some have appetites that can never be satisfied. And the house that hungers is always, always hungry.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.